The time of the harvest was finally upon them. They had waited so long for this to happen. So long had they bided their time, so long had they built up their forces, so long have they prepared to harvest all the energy that their opponents have. The elves looked towards the mystic gate that would take them into the next dimension that was full of humans. Though it would be the same planet they were on, with almost the identical flora and fauna. Something was amiss. Something was different on that side. There was no elves on the other side, only humans. Detestable, mindless humans. They had grown in number throughout the many centuries, 2,500 years. They had built up their forces, built up their weapons, and now it was time again to go and harvest the humans, as they had tried to do many, many years prior. Before they opened up the gate, they did get a word from their exalted leaders. The leaders would be towards the front as to show there was nothing to fear. The leaders stated how they had adjusted everything. They didn't realize where they had initially started to jump into the human world. They believed they were jumping into a canyon. They believed they were jumping into an area that they would simply be able to move out in every direction. Jumping into a spot that, since it was going to be so low, you wouldn't see the bright blue, green, red, and yellow that was splashed across the area as they jumped in. But no, what had happened last time was they didn't understand the oceans of Earth itself, the Earth in which the humans dominated. They jumped into several different areas, all of which were deep below the ocean itself. The resulting burst of their own magic coming forth shoved a whole bunch of the water to force itself onto the shores, raising the levels across the entire planet into insane heights. And for almost 40 solid days, the magic had to be maintained so that they could possibly harvest the energy coming off of Earth. The energy from all the suffering, all the pain, all the life that was being exerted from the humans. The humans, at least to the elves, were nothing but batteries, items that would simply be born again over and over and over again, building up more and more energy over time. And when it was right, when they had enough of the population or enough magic, the elves would simply come and take it from them. However, the flood from last time claimed many of their own lives as they were not able to maintain the barriers. The burst of water that came back through the portal was enough to kill many on the other side as they waited for their loved ones. The pressure from the bottom of the oceans sometimes is just too much. But now the elves have learned. Now that they have plushed up their own numbers and they have armed themselves as best they can, they were ready. They realized that the mid area was going to be what they needed. From what they could see of the humans, the few that they found, humans were soft, weak, emaciated things. Many of them screaming about how something had forsaken them. Many others believed that this was a punishment. Perhaps it was. And many a elf found these humans, even on the brink of death, realizing that if they shoved their blades through the human and ending its life, they could absorb all the power that was exuded after many, many lifetimes of the humans building it up. This was enough to keep the hunger for this power strong in the elves. And with this power, they were also able to extend their lives indefinitely. But now was the time of the next harvest. Had they not lost so many when they first jumped into human Earth? they would have continued there. They would have stripped it clean and taken every single soul, every single drop of rage, of love, of lust, of hate, of everything that was there, even something as weak as compassion, would be food for them, to feed their lust for energy and power. And with that, the elves could simply reshape the humans' earth into one of their own. This is what they desired: the annihilation of humans. Humans were dirty, were weak, were nothing compared to the elves. Elves were much larger, stronger, faster. Their blades moved so much quicker. Their bows could be drawn back further. And because of the way they curved their bows, they were able to reach much farther than any human could. Those that even had to use them against the humans were surprised at how easy it was to strike a human, as the humans would simply scream in rage at seeing one of their own already lost, and simply run at the elves, and the elves would take them down simply. This would cause many to believe that it would be an easy fight. Yet those in charge demanded that they still wear their full armor. They still be ready, just in case the humans had changed over time. This was seen as a joke. How could the humans change? They're nothing but evil, hairless monkeys. They scream and yell, and they throw rocks. The elves have not thrown rocks in several millennia. And now they are so well trained and well skilled in their swords, their bows, and their spears that no one would dare stand against them. Many of them thought about how it was easy to take down the orcs on their planet, and how they were able to sweep through, as the orcs were mostly brutes, large, powerful brutes. Even with their power, the elves were able to sweep around them using their superior intellect and superior mobility to simply slice the orcs to pieces. And now what few orcs remain were simply their slaves. Very, very few. Less than 1% of the orcs remained, and that was out of sheer compassion for not wanting to obliterate a species, as the orcs had shown that they were willing to bow down, but they believed humanity as a whole, and even individually, would never bow down to elven supremacy. And for that, the humans are only good for one thing: the removal of their power, the removal of their souls. Everyone lined up next to the dimensional gates, and they got ready to advance. The dimensional gate took a lot of energy, and many of those staying behind would be completely exhausted and would need to stay by the gates to absorb as much energy that came back as possible. They would need this to make sure that they would not die in the process. As the gates reached full power, there was a burst of energy, and this burst was breaking the dimensional wall. On either side was a burst of colors, a mad dash of all sorts of energies bursting out. It didn't matter where on the spectrum it was, they just spread out across the area. Many of those who were using their energies to hold the gate up were knocked over by the burst that came free. There was nothing on either planet that didn't know something was happening, as this magic was also considered slightly unnatural. But it was required, as the elves would turn back to their former mortal selves. They did not harvest what they needed from those other species. They knew once the humans were done, there was another one that would be next. Something the humans used to call a halfling. This was a surprise that the humans would actually know what one was, and many of those looked to see if there was any way that they would be able to do any reconnaissance. However, this was not going to be possible. So they would simply have to use a rush of all their weapons and all their people to make sure that no humans escaped. Within an hour of the burst, the portal was finally ready to be passed through. It was stable, and everyone started to rush through in formation. Though they kept themselves in step, they did step quite lively, as many of them wanted to make sure they killed as many humans as possible. They stepped through the gate and on to their victory. Sensors were going absolutely nuts everywhere. Ham radio started going crazy no matter what frequency anybody was on. AM FM radio screeched with everything, to include all the different channels at the same time. Everything was scrambled. The emergency broadcast system was brought into effect across every single country that had one. They tried to figure out what in the holy hell was going on. Many countries were gearing up as they didn't know if this was some sort of cyber attack. They simply didn't know. But one thing they did know is the point of origin. Immediately, aircraft were scrambled and sent over those areas. The fastest aircraft they could find, whether it was a Sukhoi 57, an F 22, maybe even a Blackbird if they had one ready, anything was sent over to see what in the hell was going on. On each continent, there was at least one of these disturbances. On each continent, there was at least one of these doorways, and around each of these continents, at least one area was being overwhelmed by elves coming out in perfect formation, bows cocked, locked, and ready to rock, many of them holding spears, all of them with blades of some sort, and of course they had their shields across their back. Many people couldn't understand what the hell they were seeing. The news got a hold of this very quick, as cell phone video showed these elves coming out, but as soon as a human was seen, they were attacked. Arrows came down with unbelievable precision. In one case, somebody held the video camera over to the side and watched their best friend get perforated by no less than 35 arrows, as more continued to hit as the body fell. This was insane. And the one streaming the video turned around, screaming, trying to get out of there, screaming all sorts of expletives, but all that you heard was and then the camera drops. And in the very edge of the camera feed, you can see elven arrows sticking out this woman's back. And with that, a small glow, almost white or blue, if some would say green almost, seemed to emanate from the body itself. They didn't know what the hell this was. Many people believed it be some sort of poison or radioactivity or something like that. But it didn't matter. As soon as they were shown to be hostile, every single military got ready. Every single military said, let's do this. And wherever there may be a militia, got their weapons and armor ready as well. Most people decided to hold into their own homes, blockading the doors and getting any weapon they had. If their country was not allowing them to have a firearm, they used anything from chairs to sharpened sticks, anything to be ready to hold off what was coming. As they looked on the news and on the internet, they saw more of what was coming. Along with the elves were the orcs being used as something to haul. What the hell was that? Were those catapults? Trebuchets? What the fuck was that? Was all anybody could say. As all this different material came out, they started to try and count them up through each of the doorways. 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 were coming through. The numbers etched up towards 100,000 each. And they just stopped counting. It was to the point where everyone knew there was going to be one hell of a fight. And in some areas, there already was. The doorways opened up right next to cities, and the elves knew this. They knew they had to take care of the cities. They knew they had to clear them as much as possible. As they ran towards all the different buildings, many of the humans simply stood there, holding a strange device in their hands. Many elves freaked out, worried that maybe the humans had figured out magic, and didn't want to wait. They simply launched their arrows as fast as they could, and with unbelievable precision were knocking down humans left and right. CCTV footage showed all sorts of humans running for cover as arrows would hit all the way around them, some of them only getting clipped in the arm and the leg and still desperately trying to run. Some of them seemingly trying to run and being yanked up by an invisible force and being crushed against the side of a building. It was insanity. It was absurdity. It was ludicrous what was going on. And all most humans could do was watch and look on with horror as more and more of their own people were being killed. Across the continent of Africa, the elves were having trouble with the topography as they were not ready for the swamps and the jungles that were there. This also happened in South America as they streamed across the Amazon in every single direction, killing anything they might see. It wouldn't matter if it was human. If it was just simple, some form of fauna, they were going to destroy it. The only thing they kept was the flora and seemed to take special care not to destroy it. As they reached towards different countries, towards different cities, it was at this point the humans had said, okay, game on. Ring the bell and cry havoc. The phrase cry havoc went across every single nation in their own language, and with that, everyone who had a modicum of sense knew what this meant. The first time the elves fell was as they approached a village outside of the city, trying to go from house to house. They thought it was a village, but it was very large. All these dwellings looked similar. And as they tried to kick in the doors and jump through the windows, all they could hear is a massive sonic weapon firing and one of their own falling back. They tried to figure out, they thought this was some sort of magic until they looked and they realized that the elf itself was bleeding from several different parts. They would simply hear a metallic clanging against each other, and then suddenly another blast would come out. Sometimes there wasn't even the metallic blast. There would be shot after shot, loud burst after burst coming out. All over the place, elves did what they could, trying to get as close as they could as they used their blades to kill everyone, man, woman, and child. It did not matter. But in the chaos, humanity had begun to pull together. Neighbors that didn't like each other stood side by side as they emptied shell after shell after shell into the elves that were coming at them, sometimes jumping at them through the air with impossible speed, using their magic to try and grab onto the humans and toss them aside. This simple telekinetic was something the humans understood well and didn't take long to adapt to. Some of them fastened themselves to trees as they were able to stop the elves cold as they came down. They started to target the orcs, but the orcs, as soon as they saw one of their own fall, would immediately drop to their knees and almost beg for some sort of survival, begging in their own language. The humans didn't know, but they didn't need to know. The orcs on their knees, laying their hands down, begging to not be shot. The humans realized this was their best chance, and many of them went to free the orcs. The orcs were scared of the human weapons, scared beyond belief, especially as their huge mechanical monsters began to roll down the streets and roll across the open plains, firing what seemed to be some sort of magical spell that hit and burst elves in all different directions. They couldn't even get their catapults set up before they were burst into different, very small, very sharp, and very fast moving pieces. Many an elf lost arms and legs, eyes, and in some cases even their heads to this. Others, if they were hit directly by this spell, were immediately blown to pieces along with everyone who was close by. Other ones couldn't realize how the humans were able to fight back so efficiently. At this point, millions of elves had entered onto the humans' earth. They believed that they would be only catching the dregs of humanity, but now they realized that if they did not take down the humans quick, they would bring even more, and more they did bring. The elves tried to bring in things like dragons, wyverns, griffins, which were all blasted out of the sky by mechanical beasts that came through with a screech, a scream, a flutter. It didn't matter. They all came in firing those strange sonic weapons. The elves couldn't understand why they would hear a shot, and it would sometimes take a second before an elf would fall down, dead or missing parts, and even worse, screeching in pain. Many of them had not felt pain in almost 2,000 years. Many of them had never actually even seen combat, and now they're seeing their brethren tore to pieces. This, however, made the elves fight even harder as they saw their friends and their loved ones fall in battle. They thought this would be easy, but no, it was not. The elves were able to take large swaths of land within the first day, but by the end of the second day, they had lost almost all of it. Many of them had been given the order to retreat. They had grabbed as much energy as they thought they could, and they were losing more and more of their own faster and faster and faster. That was until those same mechanical beasts in the air. Some seemed to breathe fire as they came by and simply shredded those that were standing next to the gate. The gate itself, being made of mystic energy, would not close. It would not close until they pulled enough energy from the other side. It was self sustaining now, and they could not close it without enough energy. The elf commander tried desperately to hold the line, but it was no choice, no chance. They didn't have any reason to believe they could survive, and most did not. Even those that were able to find houses in the middle of the woods, seemingly only one domicile, seemingly having their own. Were those unicorns? No. Unicorns have horns. What are these items that they have? They also have their own type of bovine, but this is different than what the elves are used to. But the elves decided they will take the energy from these as well. But the moment they began to slaughter these animals, they would always see at least one, if not many humans come out with their own weapons and begin to use them at range. The elves tried to fire back with their arrows, but it's kind of hard to fire the arrow once somebody blows your shoulder open with a 30-06. The elves realized they couldn't win, and many were forced to surrender as they were completely surrounded. The humans, realizing that they only had one more large group to deal with, knew that they had to cut them off and force a surrender. The elves were holding a small area in a land that was so desolate they didn't think that they could survive. This desolate landscape had a strange outback that they could not find any water, not worth enough for an entire army. They were forced up against the shorelines, even though they could take the area with not relative ease, but it wasn't going to take them all. They believed that they were going to at least be able to hold this one area and harvest as much as they needed to at least close the portal. And that night, they looked up, using their magic to enhance their eyes, and saw many, many mechanical beasts flying through the sky, a low hum seeming to be with them. They watched closely as those mechanical beasts went past them. Some of them dropped items right on top of them. Others flew overhead. They couldn't figure out what was going on until soon the items that were dropped over top of them landed and started exploding in massive balls of fire, bursting out energy on either side. The elves were finding out that these bursts of energies, if they could time it right, they could actually take this energy and pull it into themselves, giving them a slight advantage, as most of their strong magic casters had already been taken out. The elements that had passed them seemed to drop something else. Something else that seemed to be slow. Something that seemed like giant mushrooms in the sky, slowly making their way down. Why would they drop giant mushrooms? How many were there? What was that? 100? 200? 300? No, there's more over there. Several thousand over there. What about this side? Several more hundred, maybe 1,000. Why mushrooms? It was strange. In the middle of the night, here came those mushrooms. In the morning, they found out that those mushrooms were not fungus, but instead airborne soldiers that had completely surrounded the last of the elves. They held their position and tried to get the elves to surrender. And it wasn't until a sniper got up on the hill with his Barrett and blew the head of the commander clean off his shoulders, along with taking the head of one of his subordinates who just happened to be standing directly in line. The elves realized that they had lost, laid down their weapons, and begged for mercy. The humans walked up to the only commander they could find and simply asked one question: why? The answer to that question would change the direction of humanity and all the other races forever.